Hello everyone, and welcome to this guide for the Rex Matriarchs, the 3 mid-level dinosaur bosses that have been released this week. There is Pthentraken, or however you pronounce it, who attacks with Mage and is weak to range, specifically bows. There is Orikalka, who attacks with Melee and is weak to Mage, specifically fire spells. And there is Rathis, who attacks with range and is weak to Melee, specifically to stabbing weapons. I'm going to do a quick guide on all 3 of them here, going through the basic mechanics for each. And then I'm going to quickly showcase the loot that I got from doing 150 kills of these. To begin with, to get there, you can at the moment obviously use the shiny new portal in War's Retreat, which will take you right outside the entrance. If for whatever reason you're trying to get there without using that, then you want to go to the Spirit Grove, which is in the centre of Anachronia, you can see here. And over on the east side where I'm standing there is a teleportation device which will take you down into the layer. From there you can just run east to find the entrance. Anyway, to kick things off here, let's go with the first one, Pthentraken, who will be attacking with Mage. You want to be using range, ideally using a bow rather than crossbows as I'm doing here. First mechanic, she will roar and there will be a number of lines of lightning which you see coming along the floor here. When you see those appear, you want to move out of the way of them, because they will hit you for a lot of damage if you're standing in them. Shortly after that, you'll get a blue bar counting down above your head, as you can see here. When it empties, there will be a pillar of lightning on the ground, which you can see over here. If you stand in it, you will take rapid damage. If you're standing there as it spawns, you can get the overcharge buff, which will dramatically reduce your surge cooldown for a while, but if you want to avoid damage from it, then you can just move out of the way shortly before the blue bar empties, and then you won't get hit by it at all. And she will cycle those mechanics throughout the rest of the fight, so just keep dodging them as they appear. As you can see here, it's pretty doable to flick between Soul Split and Mage Prey, which will mean that you don't use a great deal, if any, food during this fight. The only thing that's worth mentioning is that the second auto attack after a lightning special, as you can see here, will be a range attack, so you either want to switch to praying range to block damage for that, or if you've got a shield with you, then you can resonance to get a nice heal off that. The only other thing to mention is that you've got to be a little bit careful with the timing for your prayer flicks. If you're far away like I am now, then you'll take the damage splat as the projectile is hitting you, so you want to time based on that. If you're a little bit closer in, which you'll actually see when we're fighting Rathis later, then the damage splat will actually happen before the projectile is even released, and so you need to preempt it a little bit. I'm hoping that they'll tidy up the timings on some of those pretty soon, because as it is, it makes it a little bit of a pain to soul split, particularly if you're rotating between the 3 different dinosaurs and need to adjust to the timings for each one. The last thing I'll mention on this one is that if you want to, you can use insulated boots to reduce the damage from the lines of lightning. You can see here that if you're wearing boots and you pray Mage, then you'll only take a very small hit splat of a couple of hundred damage. It's not necessary to do this because you can just move out of the way of the lines when they spawn, but you might want to bring them along just as a bit of extra insurance in case you accidentally click on the wrong place. And finally, just be aware that ground mechanics like the lightning and the pillar will linger for a while after the boss is dead, so do watch out for those when you're grabbing loot. Moving on to the second one here, Orikalka attacks with Melee, and it's very easy to deal with her, as I'm doing here, by just kiting her throughout the entire fight. You can run backwards and forwards, up and down the centre, taking care not to get too close to either of the others, and just stun her whenever you need to move past her, and that way she won't be able to get any hits off, and so won't ever progress to any of her specials. If you're doing this, you may also wish to bring Nature Runes so that you can cast Entangle, though be aware that as Entangle is an air spell, it will occasionally splash, more so than fire spells if you're using those as your main auto attack. And I got 110 magic from that kill, fun times. I will however also show you the mechanics here. The first one, which Hybrid has just been hit with here, is Frostbite. You'll see sort of this ring of ice extending from her, and you'll get the Frostbite mechanic, which makes you move slower and also doubles your global cooldown, meaning you attack slower as well. Shortly after the Frostbite, Orikalka will turn around and slam the ground, like she's doing here, and then there'll be a few vents of fire that appear. If you go and stand in one of them, then that will clear the Frostbite mechanic, and it will also give you a burst of adrenaline for the next few seconds, so this can be a good opportunity to drop your ultimate. Be aware that if you do stand on the lava vents when you don't have the Frostbite buff, then you will get hit for rapid melee damage, so you want to pray melee and potentially use Devotion if you are doing that. Coming on to the final one here, Rathis. Rathis attacks primarily with range, so we want to be using melee. I'm using the scythe here, but they are actually weak to stab attacks, so you ideally want to be using something like Masuda's War Spear, or potentially a Masterwork Spear of Annihilation if you have one of those around. You'll see, as I was saying earlier, the damage splats for the range attacks come pretty much as or just before she actually releases the projectile, so you do have to be aware of that and be almost preempting with your prayer flicks in order to successfully block from that. The first special that Rathis will do is launch a couple of poison pools up into the air. If these land on you, then you'll take a very heavy range hit, so you ideally want to run or surge out of the way to make sure you don't get hit by that. Once the poison pools are on the ground, you can go and stand in them to absorb them. You will take pretty heavy poison damage from this unless you've got either the Venom Blood perk, as I'm using here, or you are using anti-poison. Ideally you do want to try and absorb these pools, because a while after they have spawned, Rathis will absorb them herself, as you see here, and that will heal her. And the more poison is left on the ground, the more healing she gets. Of course, if you're doing really good DPS, or potentially if you're doing this in a duo or trio, then you can quite often burst her before she does the siphon from the pools, in which case you don't need to worry about that. She will again keep cycling those mechanics if you hang around, so do react to them as they happen. And I'll just mention finally that, much like the other Matriarchs, Rathis will do a melee attack as the second attack after her spec, and while usually you'll be right next to her, if you are further away because you've just been absorbing a pool, or perhaps you've surged away after the bombs like Hybrid is doing here, then that melee attack will actually be a charge where she'll close the distance towards you, and you can avoid that by just running out of the way, as Hybrid does here. Anyway, those are the three different Rex Matriarchs. They're not bad at all for a mid-level boss. They're kind of pitched, I'd say, around about God Wars 2 in terms of difficulty, maybe a little bit more challenging, but they've each got a couple of mechanics which you can deal with fairly easily with a bit of practice, and it's reasonably doable to sustain your health through Soul Split and Prayer Flicking. The only other thing to mention is that they do have quite high defense. You've seen in this video that I've been splashing a fair amount even with the Elder Overload buff from the Water Retreat golems and using tier 90 weaponry. You can make this a lot better if you're using the appropriate type matchup, so using fire spells on Orikalka, using a bow for Pthentraken, or using a stabbing weapon for Rathis. That does significantly improve your accuracy, and you should be splashing a little bit less with that. Anyway, just to finally go over the loot I've got from these, after 150 kills, I actually managed to get a couple of uniques. Got a Heart of the Seer and a Savage Spear Cap. I was lucky enough to get these quite early on, so the Heart sold for 35 mil and the Spear Cap for 20. They have dropped a little bit now, but when I checked earlier, the spear pieces were still sitting at around about 10 mil each. And the Heart of the Seer is actually holding its value pretty well, because people apparently don't like fighting Pthentraken, so that one's still up around 20 mil. Some of the other hearts from the other two are a little bit cheaper. In terms of common drops, it's not particularly spectacular here. You can see I got about 29 mil from these kills, which the 4 mil in coins is the value of the dinosaur hides, which I picked up and I'm going to alch in a bit. A fair chunk of that was from an unchecked Corbicular Rex, which you can see is currently sitting at 9 mil, though it's probably dropping off pretty quickly, given that people are now getting lots more from these bosses. But anyway, you can probably expect something like maybe 1 to 200k on average from common drops from these bosses. So doing some quick back-of-the-envelope maths, it looks like you might be getting around about 5 mil an hour from commons, and perhaps another 5 mil an hour from uniques. Obviously, we don't yet know exactly what the drop rates for the unique items are, but from what I've seen from various people so far, it doesn't look like they're that rare, so you should hopefully be getting one reasonably often. So we're maybe looking at around about 10 mil an hour total for sort of moderate kill times. And to be honest, if you're wanting to make money doing some mid-level bosses, then you're probably better off just staying at God Wars 2. Still, I'd encourage you to head over and give these guys a try. They are quite fun and they give you some practice at dealing with some different mechanics and doing a little bit of prayer flicking. Thank you very much for watching, hope you all enjoyed the video, and we'll see you for the next one.